This episode is sponsored by 511, a company that I've used for well over a decade and continue to use to this day. And 511 is offering you guys, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, a discount on every purchase you make with them. Before we get to that code, I want to highlight a couple of products that, again, I personally use today. One of the most impressive products they just released is their Rush Backpack 2.0. Now, for many of you, whether you're going to the fire station, the police station, whether you're traveling with your family, whether you're taking training courses, we have to fly, we have to drive, we have to take trains. And I have to say, I own multiple backpacks, many of 511's different ones, but as far as a day pack, this one was the most impressive. There are so many different compartments. The way it sits on your back is incredibly comfortable. If you are a concealed carry person, there's also a spot for a weapon. So they've thought of multiple things that a man or woman would have to do on a daily basis. That is in addition to all of the products that I talk about a lot. Their uniforms, fit for men or fit for women in the first responder professions. The footwear that they offer, whether it's the Norris sneaker or the Atlas system that is designed for foot health and therefore knees and back and hips and shoulders and neck. As a civilian, I live in a lot of their clothes as well. Their jeans stretch. You can actually squat down in them. We live in Florida here, so I wear a lot of their shorts, which again, very lightweight material. You can get it wet and it will dry almost immediately. And then moving to the fitness and tactical space, I used to have just a regular weight vest. Recently, I switched to a 511 vest and actually bought ballistic plates as well. My thinking was simply, if I'm going to have a vest, why not have one that protects me as well? And that TAC vest is trusted by law enforcement all around the country. So I mentioned they were going to offer you a discount code. So if you go to 511tactical.com and enter the code SHIELD15, SHIELD15, you will get 15% off, not just that one purchase, but every time you visit their store. And if you want to learn more about 511, their mission, their products, then listen to episode 338 of the Behind the Shield podcast with the CEO and founder, Francisco Morales. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show Carmen Ordoñez. Now, Carmen's husband, Fernando, was a City of Miami firefighter and hazmat technician. And several years into his career, he was diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer. And as you will hear, despite a valiant battle in which at one point he thought he was in remission, it ultimately took his life in 2015. Now, what brought this story to my attention was the incredible display of brother and sisterhood shown by Fernando's department in taking care of both Carmen and her son, Andy. So we discuss a host of topics from how Carmen and Fernando met, his journey into the fire service, contributing factors, grief, the power of camaraderie, and so much more. Before we get to this incredibly powerful conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment, go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library for you, planet Earth. So all I ask in return is that you share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Carmen Ordoñez. Enjoy. So Carmen, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time to come on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, James.
So I was moved by a story that, you shared a video initially. It was picked up by one of those positive video sites that I subscribe to, a lot of them, because that to me is, one of the wonderful things about the internet if you use it correctly. But it really showed not only your family story, but the element of brotherhood in the department that your late husband was a part of. So, I'm so glad that, again, God, the universe put that in front of me, and here we are. I reached out to you and we're about to have a conversation about that. So I'm very excited. Where on planet Earth are we finding you today?
So I'm in Surfside, Florida. It's a quiet little town, a few blocks away from the beach.
Brilliant. Was it Surfside that we had that disaster, the building collapse?
Yes, it was. It was actually, I'm 5 blocks away from where it happened. And it was just so devastating for the community. And, it's sad that now everyone kind of relates Surfside to this tragedy that happened. But yeah, I'm actually not that far away from where it happened. And my son's, one of his friends from school was actually in the building when it happened, but they were able to get out of the building. They were part of the building that didn't fall. So they were lucky to make it out alive.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. One of my guests I just had on was from Prescott, Arizona, just a small town in Arizona until we lost 19 firefighters there. And then all of a sudden it becomes known for that. So it is tragic. And I'm actually hoping to get one of my mutual friends who's also sitting in Miami, has another firefighter who I think was kind of spearheading a lot of that rescue effort. I think he's special ops team. So I'm hoping that we can persuade him to come on and actually tell that story, because it was, I'm sure, you being in the media, there's a very shiny object syndrome when it comes to topics, and it's on for a moment and then it's gone. And all those men and women that responded to that and then were affected by that, I felt like their story was never really told properly.
Yeah, it's very, very tragic, very sad.
So starting at the beginning of your timeline then, so tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did and how many siblings.
Sure. So I was born in New York, but my family came down to Miami when I was 1. So I don't really say I'm from New York. I kind of always want to go straight to like born and raised in Miami, because that's what I feel like I am. But so I came down to Miami when I was 1 year old, and I've been here ever since. I love it. I love the weather. It's I don't think I would trade it for any other place. And I have one older sister. She's 10 years older than me. And she's, I love her to death. And my parents got divorced when I was 9. So I grew up, my mom, single mom, working 3 jobs to make ends meet for me and my sister. So, a lot of respect for single moms and everything that they do. And went to school here. I went to school for broadcast journalism. And so it was during college where I met Fernando, my late husband. And it's a funny story. I was 19 at the time when we were introduced. We were actually introduced over the phone. And my friend was like, "You need to meet this guy." And the first thing out of her mouth was like, "He's a firefighter." So I was like, I don't know. I just gotten out of a relationship. I was like, I don't think I want to be in a relationship right now. And she's like, no, you have to meet him. He's a firefighter. And, so I was like, okay. We spoke on the phone, and we got each other. This is when AOL was like really big at the time, and AOL instant messenger. So we started chatting on AOL, and, kind of just always put him on the friend zone. And then, of course, he won me over. He was just super sweet, very romantic. And we dated for 2 years. We got engaged. And we got married really young. I was 22, about to turn 23, and he was 25 when we got married.
Beautiful. Well, yeah, I mean, it's so good to hear. Sadly, there can be negative, what's the right word? Stigma, I guess, attached to the firefighter world. Either A, we're great partners, great husbands, great, fathers, or it's the other one where you've been screwed over by a firefighter. So I'm glad that he was able to show you the former, not the latter.
Yes, of course. And of course, he showed off, took me to the fire station. So, he pulled out all the stops. Beautiful.
Well, going back to your parents for a moment, I'm obviously an immigrant to this country. Were they originally from the US or were they from somewhere else?
They're from Colombia. So my dad worked as a mechanical engineer, and he traveled a lot. So my parents, they met in Colombia, but then through my dad's job, they traveled a lot. So They lived in Spain for a while, for like 10 years. And then they lived in Germany. That's where my sister was born, in Hamburg. And then eventually they moved to Miami. Well, they moved to New York and then to Miami. So
was that just following the natural kind of Latin journey that a lot of people take?
Yes, definitely. And, definitely they instilled a lot of like hard work because, of course, coming here to the United States as, starting from scratch, my mom cleaned houses. So definitely you value a lot the hard work. And I think, it's very big in the Latin community, just a lot of hard work.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that's kind of lost a little bit I had this, a lot of people move here. A lot of people even, not so much my story, but people from Asia and areas like that, they give up being physicians, mm-hmm. and then come back and now they're, working in a factory or cleaning houses. So the pride in being where you're from originally, but also the pride now being a new country. I think sadly the word, immigrant and immigration has got a negative connotation to it as well. Yet when you hear these stories, there is that national pride. Again, even the word national pride has a negative connotation, but it's true that patriotism that so many immigrants actually feel.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry for my dog barking in the background there. All right. Well, then let's talk about Fernando for a second. So tell me where he was born.
Yeah. So Fernando was actually born in Colombia. So he lived in Colombia until he was 5 years old. And, same story, his parents had really great jobs in Colombia, but he had some family that had moved to the United States and they told him you need to move to the US. There's many opportunities here. So his family, his mom, his dad, and his sister came to the United States when he was 5. And, same story. They, started from the bottom, just working in hotels, in the restaurant industry, but, been able to work their way up. So Fernando went to school here, kindergarten. And when he was 18, as the story goes, he didn't want to go to college. So his dad told him, he's like, you need to find out what you're going to do with your life, or else you need to move out of the house. So around that time is when 9/11 happened. And Fernando, that was kind of his his inspiration to become a firefighter. So he told his dad, I want to be a firefighter. So he's like, okay, I'm going to take you, find out everything you need to know to get you enrolled. And here in Miami, they're firefighters, paramedics. So they do both. So he went to school. He started off as an EMT, and his dream was always to work for the city of Miami. And drive the red trucks. That was his dream. So he accomplished that. He graduated. He started in the fire academy pretty young. I want to say he was 20 when he started working as a firefighter, and he loved his job. So passionate about, what he did, being able to wake up every morning. And I feel like very few people can say that they actually worked doing something that they loved, that they were so passionate about. But yeah, that was his dream. And he was a very go-getter, it's very silly as well. And which was perfect because they would, do a lot of pranks in the fire station. So he enjoyed that a lot.
Now, what about sports? Obviously the profession itself demands a level of fitness. When I look back at some of the pictures of you and Fernando together, seemed like he took his fitness seriously. So what was he playing? What was his kind of focus on that?
Yeah, so he did, I think, 2 days of playing football in high school, and then he got a concussion. So his mom was like, no more playing football. But he was a very big sports fan. He loved football, watching football. He loved basketball, the Miami Heat, his favorite, baseball. He did a lot of those sports when he was younger. soccer as well. He didn't really play much as, just with time, because he started, when he was 20 working in the fire station. So it didn't really give him much time to play any sports outside of the fire station, but he very much enjoyed. I mean, Sundays, you would hear the TV going on here with football and basketball. We lived in downtown Miami when we first got married. So we had the American Airlines Arena right next to us. So we would always go to the basketball games, and he really big sports guy.
So you guys met, as you said, you were, young 20s. Prior to meeting him, were there any misconceptions that you had about the fire service that you learned were wrong once you started dating a firefighter?
Yes, definitely. You definitely have this idea, okay, if they're working 24 hours, it's very easy for them to, maybe say they're working, but they're not really. So that's kind of like the idea that I had of firefighters. I also had this idea of the calendar firefighters. Of course, I was, 20, didn't really know much, but he definitely, erased all those misconceptions that I had. And it's just a very, very beautiful career. And I think people that become firefighters, they just have this passion to help others. And that's something that I admire a lot. They kind of lay down their life for others. And that's really, firefighters, police officers, just so much respect for everything they do and all the hard work. I think people that are not in this world of that have someone, a family member or spouse that's a firefighter or police officer, they sacrifice so much, sacrificing holidays and, not being with your family on Christmas or Thanksgiving. You definitely need to have a passion for this job. And he definitely had that, and he just loved helping other people.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned about 24-hour shifts. What was the shift pattern? Was it 24/48?
Yes. So he would work for 24 hours. He would have 2 days off, and then he would work again. I want to say he was in the C shift. That was his shift. And he worked in downtown Miami, Fire Station 1. So, it was a lot of, I think at the end, it ended up taking a toll on him and his health.
Absolutely. Well, we'll obviously get to that, but it's something that I talk about a lot. There is a cost, on us and on you guys as well, on the family. So as you started, transitioning from dating into, marriage, what then did you experience as far as being a firefighter family? And because it's something I think that it needs to be told is we always, people say to us, oh, thank you for your service and all that stuff. Well, the men and women that we leave at home, the children, while we go to work, are essentially single parents for 24, 48 hours, or in the wildland, arena, it might be weeks on end. So what was that going from, having someone in a kind of a dating experience to now living with someone that every third day was not there?
Yeah, it definitely had its pros and cons. And I think a lot of people, they don't see it from the eyes of the wife or the eyes of, the husband. It was, not something that I didn't really have any ideas of what it would be like until I actually lived it. But, the good part was when he was home, he was home for 2 days. But you also have to take in mind the day after the shift, he was tired. So he wanted to nap. And, that's, of course, and that's, he's trying to make up, especially if he had a hard day the day before. So it's not always like, okay, you have 2 days, let's go do something fun. And then I'm working as well. So that part was difficult, and then being home, sleeping alone, I would, where we live, it's really safe, but still, as a woman, sleeping by myself at home, any little noise, I'd be like, what was that? And, we got a dog, we got a Rottweiler. So I felt a little bit, he was my companion when my husband was working. But that definitely, there are challenges to that. And like I mentioned, with the holidays. There was one time, or hurricanes, we live in Florida. So I remember one time we were all having dinner, celebrating as a family. And then he got a call that, they needed him at the fire station because they were preparing, there was a hurricane. There was some planning going for that, or, so he would just, he's like, I have to go. So it's kind of like, you're sharing that person with their career, and that as a wife, has its challenges. And, sometimes he wouldn't really like to talk much about the things that he would see at the fire station. But I know, maybe some of the runs that he got were hard. Sometimes they involve like little children. So I know that also must take a toll on you mentally as well, to just like go about your day normally. So, yeah.
Well, you touched on something I think that is very important as well. And I wrote a book a couple of years ago now and talked about this very thing, is when you are married to, for example, a firefighter, you have a trained man or woman, depending on, what that spouse is, who is very capable of protecting you during, a wildfire or a hurricane. The problem is we're driving away. And I've had this multiple times where there's a hurricane bearing down on my home and I have to go and, protect the community that I work for, leaving my family somewhat to fend for themselves. So there's an element of guilt as well when you have to go respond somewhere else and leave your family at home.
Exactly. You said it. And there was many times where there was a hurricane and he had to work. So I was, I would stay with my mom, but, you said it, he would try to prepare the house as best as he could, leave everything ready, but he had, his job came first in that case.
Now, also, when you were talking about pre-dating a firefighter, you talked about, the 1 day on, 2 days off, and that's a verbiage that I think we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot with. Because when you actually do the math and think of a regular work day as 8 hours, 9 hours with a 1 hour lunch break of, a 9 to 5 kind of job, then a 24-hour shift is 3 days squished into one, of which the last 8 bleeds into that second day. So we go around saying, oh yeah, we work 1 day on, 2 days off. We actually work 3 days on, 1 day off when you look at it. And it doesn't sound so great then. And if you expand that to a month, we work 30 days a month. But we go around and say, oh, I only work 10 days a month. No, we don't, because we do 3 days, so. And what you told me, just then about how he was feeling when he came home has been, mirrored by so many people on here. That first day, we are completely exhausted. And then that second day, our mind is already thinking about ramping up to go back to work again.
Yeah. Or worse, sometimes he would just keep going. Sometimes he would get home and I would tell him, like, aren't you tired? Like, shouldn't you sleep? And he's like, no, I have a lot to do. So, there were some days where he wouldn't rest, where he would just, like get home from work, have breakfast, and then go about the day doing errands. And sometimes he wouldn't sleep. He wouldn't nap. He wouldn't catch up on that sleep. And I even hate saying catching up on sleep, because you don't really catch up on sleep. You need to get that sleep on that day. You every single day you need your 8 hours of sleep. But that's, as a firefighter, that's impossible. It's hard. Yeah.
And it shouldn't be impossible, but the way that we do our work week at the moment makes it impossible. So that's a whole other discussion. So with that, his actual career path, I know he found himself working on the hazmat team. So kind of walk me through that.
Yeah. So, I remember he was thinking about, maybe trying to be a lieutenant, but then he thought, that one was, required a lot more from him. So he decided to get into the hazmat team, and he got to work in the hazmat team, I want to say, for maybe like 3 years. And so, he was in the hazardous materials. So anytime there was like a gas leak or any of that stuff. And, he was so good at his job. He was very analytical. And, so I think you need a person like that, especially to be a firefighter. Like, you can't make any mistakes because everyone is counting on you. And I think everyone, when he was working, And a lot of his firefighter friends during his celebration of life, I don't know why I get emotional.
No, well, I do. And please don't apologize.
It's funny because it's crazy. It's been 6 years, but anyways, during his celebration of life, his captain said, like, when Fernando was on, like, I knew, like, we're good, you know? So they all had this, like, trust in him that when he was working, they were, like, in really good hands. And I think that's so important, you know, like, having that team that you know, that if your life depends on it. And he was that person for many people. Sorry.
No, well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to invoke that emotion from you, but I think, you know, it's also important because this is what happens when we lose someone like that, you know, and it stays forever. And you talk about it being 6 years. My wife, I'm remarried. When I met her, she just lost her boyfriend to suicide, and that was over 10 years ago. And, you know, there's times where it just washes over her and, you know, she's in tears. So, you know, just because grief is processed doesn't mean that it goes away.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, as a firefighter wife, you know, I always appreciated what he did, but I think it was after his death that I really grasped the magnitude of what he did and his job. And not only that, but we had a baby together. So I was like, oh my God, I had this like paramedic at home, you know, and I never really saw it that way. I was like, you know, and he taught me so much. Like, I learned so much from him, like fire safety and all these things. You know, I'm remarried now. And even now I teach my husband now, okay, like, you can't do this. Or if you're putting the pan, like, what are you doing? The pan handle can't go out. You need to put it sideways. So he taught me so many things, and I'm so just like grateful for him. And like I said, I didn't really grasp the magnitude of his job and what he did until he passed away. And then also hearing stories from his, you know, firefighter friends of like how much, you know, they admired him. I wanted to share this story just to really understand the type of person that he was. He was so selfless that one time when they were driving the fire truck, there was, I don't know if you call him like the newbie or a rookie.
Yeah, the rookie or probie.
Yeah, the probie. So the probie was driving the fire truck and crashed it. He got in an accident. And Fernando immediately told him, let's switch seats. I'm going to say that I was driving. So he did that right away. So the probie wouldn't get in trouble. And I remember at the funeral, he shared that story with me. He's like, I'm never going to forget like what your husband did. Like, you know, just showed you the type of person that he was.
Well, I'm so glad you told that story, because I mean that you know, when you're on probation, your job is in the balance. And so that was a very, very selfless act, because he probably saved his entire career by that one moment.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's the other thing is, hand on my heart, most of the people that I have worked with in the fire service, when mentally they're in a good place, let me preface that, because what this does to you, you know, can send you emotionally to some strange places, but are some of the best husbands and wives, some of the best mothers and fathers, you know, and they really are incredible humans, and that gets lost. And same with law enforcement too. And then you see some of the way that some of these people are painted, and again, you know, the sacrifice that they make, the sacrifice that you make is lost in, you know, sometimes even in the politics of conversations. But these are the incredible human beings that put on a uniform and leave their families to go and serve strangers.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's why for me it was so important. In Florida, as you might know, they hadn't passed the cancer presumption law. And so that for me was something, you know, even after Fernando passed away, it was so important for me to advocate for that, because cancer is the number one cause of death for firefighters. And if you are putting your life in danger, if you are sacrificing time with your family for help to help the community, the least, the government can do for you is to pass these types of laws that gives you assurance if something were to happen to you, that you will be taken care of, your family will be taken care of. So that was something that, I'm so happy it did pass. I think it passed in 2018. But there had been, I want to say, more than 40 states where it had already passed, and it still hadn't passed in Florida. So, that's why it's so important. At the same time, if firefighters are risking their life, putting their lives in danger, that, the community does, really appreciate that. And that's one way that it shows. And I'm so excited that that law passed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it was a fight for him as well. I remember it was all the boots on the Capitol steps, and to show how many people we lost. Yeah,
Fernando's boot was on there. I have a picture, that I love, hold very dear. It is very impactful to when you see all those boots, how many firefighters, pass away from cancer.
Absolutely. And that's the discussion that I want to see parallel to that is the prevention discussion. I think there has been, good movement when it comes to understanding the decontamination and the safety. The Healthy Firefighters, the guys out of Sweden that brought that concept over here, has been incredible. But as we talked about, the work week stands, and that's never even allowed to be in a discussion. And until we stop working the men and women that wake up at 3 a.m. and go search a building and then come out and, then act as a paramedic and treat that person, working them 56 hours a week, but the person in the bank works 40. It's so backward that is another, leg of the stool of wellness from our firefighters, whether it's the cancer, the obesity, the mental health, and that has to be in discussion as well. I think we have to have a standard work week, like Boca Raton. Boca is 42-hour work week, 24/72. I think personally, we would move the needle so far in the positive direction if we address the work week as well as some of these other conversations.
Yes, that is so important. And I don't think we talked about this, but, Fernando passed away from stage 4 stomach cancer. And when he was diagnosed, I spent probably every waking moment just learning as much as I could about cancer and trying to find ways, how to help him. But one of the main things that I learned about cancer, because when you go to the doctor and, these firefighters, first of all, I really do believe the physical exams need to be a little bit different for firefighters, because Fernando had a physical exam every single year. But when he was diagnosed, it was stage 4, stomach, it was terminal at that point. So I really do feel some of the physical exams need to be better. But one of the things that I learned about cancer, and when you go to the doctor, they'll ask you, do you have any family history of cancer? But really only 5% of cancers are genetics. That means they're hereditaries. The rest, 95%, is from, your lifestyle, toxins in the environment, not getting enough sleep, because when you don't get enough sleep, your immune system goes down. And when your immune system goes down, you're not able to fight, these diseases, what you eat. So I learned so much about, just cancer. And I think, it was just the perfect storm, not getting enough sleep, the diet that Fernando had wasn't probably the best. He was in the hazmat team, so he was exposed to hazardous materials. So I definitely think if there is more awareness on changing, as much as we can from, the diet, eating more, maybe foods that can help. There's many studies that show there's certain types of food that is better at preventing cancer, antioxidants, strawberries, fruits, all those. as well as cruciferous, broccoli and all those types of vegetables. But I think there definitely needs to be more awareness on ways to prevent it, and I think as firefighters too, there is, when you look at pictures from like the old firefighters, they would have their face covered in soot, and that would kind of be, the symbolism for, you're like the strong firefighter guy. I remember Fernando would come home from work and he would blow his nose and it would just, the tissue paper would be black. And I remember thinking, God, that cannot be good, and this would happen many times. So I think, there needs to be more awareness about, washing your bunker gear and wearing your mask the whole time. Because, sometimes in the news, I'll watch, firefighters, putting out the fires, but then I'll see them like taking it off. And I feel like I want to tell them like, no, like, don't take it off right away. And if there's many things, not only for the firefighters, but also preventing the heartache for your family, as a firefighter. So many things that you can do to prevent, leaving your wife a widow or your kids, without their father.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head with the image of the tough firefighter. And I always used to joke about that. Like, if I ever found a baby in a burning building, I was going to stop and rub soot all over my face first so that they're ready for the news photographer when you walk out. But the reality is, as you said, it's not only, extinguishment, it's overhaul. I know a big thing for me was car fires and dumpster fires. You'd see people not mask up. Well, firstly, the explosion hazard of just your eyes alone. But secondly, those are, chemical, toxic, just horrendous cocktails, and there's no reason at all to be exposed to that. But I've got a very short career in the fire service. I spent 14 years. I went in 2004, and even then I've seen it, change immensely. So the guys that have been on 30 years, the way they were taught back then versus now is so different, and you still see that, that complacency kills, sadly.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and one of the biggest things that has changed is your fires from the 50s and 60s are so much different. Now you have computers, you have all these different toxins that are in your home, that when they burn up, they're just, more toxic. So, there's differences as well.
Absolutely. Well, I kind of want to walk through the relationship timeline. So I know you just had what would have been your 15th anniversary on a very special date last month. So tell me about that date and then walk me through Andy as well.
Yes. So like I said, we met when I was 20, we got married 2 years later. I had just graduated college. And so we thought, now's the perfect time. We got married. We got married on April Fool's Day. So I want to say it was the only day the venue had available. So we're like, okay, it doesn't matter. As long as we get married, who cares if it's April 1st? So, we got married on April Fool's Day. And, we were married for 8 years altogether. And when we were married for 6 years, we thought, okay, now is the perfect time to kind of grow our family. And so we had our son a year after, and he was born in 2013, and he was Fernando's pride and joy. Amazing father. He taught me so many things. Like, he would make the baby food and all organic, and he would sign up for the newsletters of these moms and strollers and all these things. And he would help make the baby shower list. He was very, very involved, and Andy was his pride and joy. And it's funny, I actually, by accident, I came across these old text messages from Fernando on my cell phone last week. And all his, when he was working, and he would send message oh, kiss Andy for him, tell him I love him. So he was just this amazing father. And Andy was I want to say he was just going to turn 2 when Fernando got diagnosed. Fernando was diagnosed in December of 2014, and Andy's birthday was in January. So Andy was just 2, so didn't really get to be, unfortunately, a dad for too long. But I always say the 2 years that he had, he was, is amazing dad.
Oh, he sounds incredible, and it's funny because it mirrors. I can remember when I was with my little boy, I was reading all the What to Expect When You're Expecting books, and I think maybe that's the firefighter in us. We want to study parenting.
Yeah. Oh my! Like, he would put me to shame. Like, I feel like, oh my God, you're like a better parent than me for sure. And he would send me. I would be at work, and he would send me text me oh, check out this newsletter, or he would sign up to Baby Center. And you're right. I definitely think that is kind of the firefighter in him, and to do that. But yeah, it's amazing.
Well, then let's kind of walk through. I mean, you touched on the diagnosis right before Andy's second birthday. So, walk me through how his health was before, and then that horrendous journey that you took.
Yeah. So Fernando was always this healthy guy, very healthy, very strong. When you think about firefighters, he was it, this strong guy. And I want to say too, as a firefighter wife, you always have this fear that, something might happen. I, of course, would just put everything in God's hands, and kind of had to really work on that and surrender it all to God. But I remember if he would be home a few minutes late, I'd be like, "Are you okay?" I remember one time he was running late, and I remember I got in my car and I was like, "Oh my God, I'm gonna go to the fire station. Something happened to you." And then. But little did I know that cancer is actually the number one cause of death for firefighters. So in my head, I was worrying about all these other things, and it ended up being something else. But I remember in October of 2014, he was working that day, and I got a call in the morning. He was telling me that he was running late because he had to go to the emergency room. He had really horrible back pain. They ended up discovering he had kidney stones. So, he came home. They had him on some medicine, trying to see if he could pass the stones, on its own, but it wasn't, the pain was there and it wasn't going away. So he scheduled surgery to get the kidney stones removed. And, he just kept feeling bad, and the pain wouldn't go away. But all this time he was kind of, just, thinking it was the kidney stones, relating it back to the kidney stones. But then there was one point, and I remember November, Thanksgiving, that was a really hard Thanksgiving now looking back, because he didn't really have much of an appetite. He didn't want to eat anything that Thanksgiving. And then a week after Thanksgiving, he says, he looked in the mirror and he saw his eyes and they were yellow. And, of course, he knew right away. He's like, this isn't a good sign. I have jaundice. And then his stomach was also swelling. So immediately went to the doctor. And when we went to the doctor, the doctor pulled up, he had a CAT scan when he had his kidney stone. So he pulled up that CAT scan, and he immediately saw that there was fluid inside the stomach. And he told us, he's like, I don't know why they didn't catch this before, but you have ascites. And of course, I had no idea what that was. So I remember asking the doctor, what's causing the ascites? And I remember the doctor's face just kind of turned pale. And he said, there's only 2 causes for ascites. It's either liver failure or cancer. And of course, you never really think you're going to hear that word cancer. It's kind of those things that, it always happens to other people until it happens, to you. But I remember he was just very relieved that he kind of had an answer of, something that was going on, because he was feeling bad, for 2 months now. And so he just felt very relieved. And I remember they admitted him into the emergency room, and he was in the hospital for 2 weeks, just running tests. They did an endoscopy, and that's where they found through the endoscopy that there was tumors inside his stomach. And when they did a biopsy of those tumors, that's when they found out that it was stage 4. It had spread to the peritoneum. And, I remember asking the doctor what the prognosis was. And, he told us it's 6 to 9 months. Like any type of treatment is going to be it's going to be palliative. And of course, we immediately, and I'm very like emotional person, but in that moment, and for both of us, I felt just kind of like God's presence, God's peace. And there's no other way to explain it, especially when someone tells you, okay, you have 6 to 9 months to live. And I just felt this like peace and kind of like, okay, we're going to fight this. We're going to give it everything. And so Fernando started chemotherapy, and at the same time was also doing a little bit of, like natural things as well, kind of any tool we had, we're going to fight this through every way. And in January, in January, we actually went to New York, got a second opinion as well, at another memorial, Sloan Kettering, I think it's called, can't remember now. And so after the chemo, he started feeling better. The ascites went away. And in April, when he did his PET scan, they found no evidence of disease. And we were just ecstatic. We're like, we got our miracle. We were, Fernando was feeling great. He said he never felt better. And so I remember we went to Disney with our son, and we just had like this amazing time, and just very thankful kind of that we got our miracle. But, that was very short-lived. 2 months after, he started feeling bad again. So this was like around June. And, he started feeling like the pain again, like pain in his stomach. And he went back to the doctor, and they found that, the cancer never went away. It's just sometimes the cancer, especially stomach cancer, the cells are so microscopic that it's not picked up in a PET scan. So, we're like, okay, let's do this again. So he started back on chemotherapy, and just this time it really took a toll on his body. And, it's for anyone that has gone through cancer, they know that, chemo, it's just very, it's very hard. And, he decided to stop chemo. And, we even talked about going to like a clinic in Mexico. Like we didn't know which way to approach this. But at this point, he was just very, very weak to travel. And so in August, his birthday was August 23rd when he turned 34. The day after his birthday, I remember we went to the emergency room, and that was the last time that we would ever go back to the hospital. But before then, there was lots of trips to the emergency room. It was just a very, very hard, difficult time. It's a lot of like middle of the night. He would wake up with like pain, and, a lot of pain medication he had to take. And thankfully we had my in-laws and my mom, which would help with our son, but definitely missed out a lot of that time with our son, because we were just focused on like getting Fernando better and, getting through this. But then August 24th, he went to the hospital, and he never came back. He never came back home. We spent 38 days in the hospital. And in the beginning, he was still very lucid. But as it progressed, as the cancer progressed, it's very hard to watch, because you're basically seeing this like once strong firefighter just, I think he was, probably weighing like under 100 pounds. Like he just, was very weak, had lost so much weight, and it was very, very difficult to watch. But it was also beautiful to watch. And I feel like so, kind of grateful that like I was his person to be with him during that time. And just seeing his faith, and never once complain, like never once say like, why me? Like, why is this happening to me? Just very, very, like, I don't think I would be able to have handled it that way. But he just like taught me so much. And I remember when he was still lucid, he would tell me, he's like, Carmen, he's like, I need you to promise me that you're going to remarry. Like, I need you. And he started going through like this list, like, you need to put Andy in soccer classes, you need to put him in baseball. And at this time, I'm like, I don't want to hear like, you're going to be okay. Like, I still had all this kind of like faith that, we were like, something was going to happen. He had just started immunotherapy. So I was like, okay, maybe this is our answer. And I had all this hope, and I think he had a lot of hope too. But then there was one part in his journey where he kind of knew. I think there comes a time where, and I actually read this book from like a hospice doctor that said there comes a point where you kind of know, like it's your time, and you kind of, you're okay with it. You kind of make peace with it. So Fernando had got to that point where he was like, okay, I'm at peace and I'm ready to go. And I remember like, no, like you have, like I kept telling, like, you have to, we're going to keep fighting this. And I remember him telling me, he's like, Carmen, you're being very selfish, like you need to let me go. And I was like, didn't want to hear it. And, and I kind of, now looking back, I kind of wish we had those talks. Because the only things I had to go by was like remarry and put Andy in soccer. I was like, I wish I would have asked him like more questions. And I think even, for people that are married to firefighters or police officers, and even for anyone, like tomorrow is not guaranteed. So I always encourage people to have those hard talks. It's so important to like for anyone hearing this, like today, sit down with your spouse or your partner and like ask the questions. Like, if I were to pass away, what would you want me to do with this? Or like, what should, and I didn't really get to have those conversations because my mind didn't want to go. It didn't want to go to that place. Even when the doctors would tell me, he needs to be put in hospice. But for me, hospice meant like, that's it. Like, we're done. And I was like, we're not there. Like, we're going to keep fighting this. I remember the day that he passed away, and crazy story, but I was at the hospital every single day for 38 days. Like, my mom would take care of our son, my in-laws would take care of Andy. But the day that he passed away, so before he was, I work as, I don't even know how to, I don't want to say blogger, but I also do like TV segments on television. And I remember the day that he passed away, I had told him like a month prior that I had this opportunity to do this like TV segment for work. And after that, there was an event, like a blogger event, raising awareness for breast cancer. And it was right next to the hospital. It was at the Miami Beach Women's Center. And I remember I told him, I'm like, I don't know if I should take this job. And at this point, I hadn't really worked much for 10 months because I was just focused on, being with him and, being his caregiver. But he told me, he's like, no, take this. Like, you need to take this job. Like, it's important that you take it. So I was like, okay. So the day he passed away, I remember I called my mom and I told her, because I always wanted to make sure if I needed to go home sometimes I would go home, take a quick shower, and then go back to be by his side. I would sleep next to like his bed on this like little chair. And so they finally gave me like this foldable bed. But I always wanted to make sure he was never alone. Like he was always had someone there. So I asked my mom, I'm like, Mom, I need to do this thing early in the morning. I'm going to be back in the hospital by 11 a.m. Can you be with him? Can you be with Fernando? And I remember his parents had to, I don't know, they had something that day that they couldn't be there as well. So my mom said I could be there for maybe like 2-3 hours, but then, I need to go to work. So then I called his cousin and I asked his cousin, can you come from this time? So I arranged it perfectly. I'm like, my mom's going to be here from this time to this time. And then at 5 a.m., I had to leave to the TV station. And I remember I did this TV segment, which looking back, I'm like, I have no idea how I had the strength to even do a TV segment that day. And then afterwards, I went to the event for breast cancer awareness. And it was around 10 a.m. And the event was supposed to finish at 11. So I was supposed to be back pretty, it was pretty quick. And I remember I was sending text messages to his cousin, like, how's Fernando doing? And I remember she texted me, oh, he's doing good. He seems very peaceful. And I remember as soon as I got that text message, I got this like heavy feeling in my stomach, like, oh, why did she say that he looks peaceful? Like, I don't know. I just got this like really, really weird feeling. And 15 minutes later, she calls me back and she's like, Carmen, she's like, you need to get to the hospital right away. And I remember asking, like, is everything okay? Is Fernando okay? She's like, I just need you to get back to the hospital. So I remember I like ran out the event. I think I took off my shoes and just like started running. I got in the car and I didn't even park the car. I literally left it right in front of the emergency room and like ran in, went up the elevator, and his room was all the way at the end of this hallway. And I saw his cousin and the doctors all outside of his room. And that's where I kind of knew that he had passed away. And I remember just like dropping to the floor, and it was just very, very hard day. But yeah, I think your mind too kind of blurs everything else out because I don't remember anything else. I just remember just having so much support too from my in-laws and my sister-in-law, planning his celebration of life. But I just remember, just that being kind of the worst day of my life. But even then, definitely have felt God's grace through that moment and carrying me through. So yeah. That's kind of in a nutshell.
Well, I mean, such a heart-wrenching, journey that you had to be through. This is completely different because this man was 99 years old, but I basically nursed my granddad his final few days. He was riddled with cancer again from a healthy man. I mean, the guy got hit by a car, T-boned by a car, and walked it off. I mean, that was at like 97 years old. The guy was incredible, but he got cancer, which is very, very rare for someone that old. And very much the same, was completely jaundiced, almost like a Simpsons character by the time he was there and held his hand. And I heard you talking about Fernando choosing for that moment when you were gone to slip through. And when I was listening to it, because it was one of the other I think the Widow podcasts that you were on, I remember what a dichotomy that was. I got to be there with my granddad, but it was one of the hardest things of my entire life is watching someone that you love take their final breath. So you talk to me about that and the perception that he didn't want you to experience that moment.
Yes, for 100%. Like, and that goes back to how selfless he was, because I was there every single day. I'm like, you pick the day that I wasn't there to pass. And he waited for his parents not to be there as well, because his parents would also, they were in the hospital, they would visit him and stay with him. And I 100% believe that he waited for that moment where I wasn't there and his parents, weren't there to pass away. And, looking back, I definitely think that that was a blessing in disguise, because I don't think, just having that image of Fernando passing away, I don't know, how I would have dealt with that. So I just not that the other images of him being sick, but I don't know how I would have dealt with that, him taking his last breath. So I definitely feel, and even talking to his best friend, he's like, oh, that's so Fernando. Of course he did that. Of course he waited for that moment to pass. And definitely know that was his plan.
Now, you talked about reading the book from the hospice doctor. I had Dr. B.J. Miller on a couple of times, who's a palliative care physician. And death is such an uncomfortable conversation, but he actually ended up writing a book as well. And it's literally like what to expect when you're expecting but for death, and getting your affairs in order and all these different things and having these conversations. When you look back now, the conversations that you weren't able to have, what would they look like, for people that are maybe experiencing the same thing with their loved one?
Yeah. Well, one of the good things and one of the about Fernando is he had everything in order, in regards to our finances, in regards to, there's so many things that I started learning once I became a widow that I didn't have to go through, because Fernando had everything in order. Like, our bank accounts were in both of our names. So I didn't have to deal with our home. Of course, we bought it together, so it's both of our names. But there's so many people that when they pass, and I think if there's one less thing that you can alleviate, you're already going through the burden of loss. Like, you don't want your loved ones to deal with the burden of probate. So if, let's say, your husband only had a bank account in their name, you have to get a lawyer. You have to go through this court process called probate to be able to get access to that bank account. And I didn't have to go through any of that because Fernando had everything in order. Fernando even had cancer insurance. And I just like to, I think, we did see God's hand in so many things. Who in their 30s has cancer insurance, So I think there's so many things that, as far as, having a will, I think is so important. Fernando didn't have a will, but he had, he told me what he wanted me to do in some of those cases. But yeah, I think just having all your finances in order is something very, very important. And yeah, I don't know what else I would have asked him. I would have wanted him to maybe write a letter to our son. But I don't know. I don't even know what that letter, would have said, or a letter to me. But yeah, I just think at the same time, I think because I did have all this hope that he was going to get better, I think that's what also got me through that hard time. Because at the same time, I don't know what I would have done if I didn't have hope. And I think that hope is something so powerful, and it's what definitely got us both through, those hard times. And even after he passed away, having that hope that life could be beautiful again, that I wanted to honor Fernando's life by really living my life to the fullest, and that Andy had already lost one, parent. I wasn't going to let him lose another parent while they were living, and just making sure I was present for our son. And that to me was very important. But I would definitely say, making sure you have all your finances in order, your bank accounts, whose name is on the bank account. And, for firefighters, are they in your, I know there's certain things that firefighters get. Make sure your beneficiaries are updated. So many important things that that you don't really think about. That's especially when you're younger, you don't really think about these things because you think like it can never happen to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you talked about that, feeling the hand of God as well. Talk to me about Fernando's faith, and you were talking about him even, I guess, ministering people from his bed.
Yes, yeah. So this was something so beautiful to watch because Fernando was just like on this mission, like before he passed away, when he was still, lucid, he kind of had this like mission. He's like, I need to just really, you said, minister to others. And I remember when his firefighter friends would go see him, he would tell them like, how's your relationship with Jesus, and making sure that they knew, like, Fernando was, just like in this really good place of like, he's like, I know what's going to happen to me when I die, like, because of this, this assurance, I know that I'm going to see my family again. And that's something that was, what's also gotten me through is, because of our faith, I know where he is. I know that I am going to see him again one day in heaven. And so for Fernando, it was so important, to really talk to his firefighter buddies. And of course, this is a conversation that he had never had before because, you're not going to be like in the kitchen eating with your friend, like, hey, let me talk to you, it's awesome. But for him, it was just so important to kind of get that message across to his firefighter friends. And it's not about like religion or being religious. It's nothing like that. It's just having this really like relationship, with Jesus. And because Fernando had that, he just had this peace that really, you can't explain it. And I think, it's something that is very, important. And it's what's gotten me through during those hard times. And I think it's also something that I, struggled with my faith as well when Fernando passed away. I was like, come on, God, like what happened? Like I had all this faith that Fernando was going to get better and we didn't get our miracle, but then I really learned that, having faith is not like your faith is really shown not when everything is going right, everything is going perfect. It's when things don't go the way that you plan. But just knowing that even when things don't go the way you plan, that you do have, like God's going to walk you through it. Like you're just going to have this peace that you could really just surrender all of your problems to him and all of your worries. So that was just very beautiful to watch, watching Fernando talking to his firefighter buddies about that. And I remember when he passed away, he did talk about what he wanted, before, which I think that's also very important. We talked about like, what are things to talk about? And Fernando did tell us, he's like, I want to, make sure that, we do the celebration of life, that everyone, it's not a time to like be sad. Like, I want you to play this song and then play this song. So, that I think was very, he did have some time to do that. And then he said, I also want at the end of the celebration of life to do a calling if anyone wants to, accept God in their life. And we did that. And so many people came up, so many of his firefighter friends. So I think that was very beautiful.
That reminds me of one of my friends, John Perez, who passed away also from it was actually an autoimmune disease. But I mean, sadly, it's not one thing that kills us, it's everything that kills us. So, there's no one type of disease that we get. But it was kind of the same thing. His thing was there was a celebration of life. We all had to wear Hawaiian shirts. It was very uplifting and fun. And I've always said the same thing. I can't stand bagpipes, especially now because I've listened to them so many times. So I told my wife, if there's bagpipes at my funeral, I'm going to jump out of that coffin and strangle you. So there better be, something a lot more up tempo than that, because it is absolutely just crushing, when we have a traditional firefighter service, because it happens so often.
Yeah. And something very special. I don't think I've ever shared this before, but, Fernando asked to be cremated. And he asked to wait until Andy, our son, was 13 to spread his ashes in the beach, in the ocean. So Andy's 9. So that day is, it's quickly how Andy was 2 when he passed away. So it's quickly how time, goes by. So, I know that day is going to be very bittersweet, but it's going to be very, very beautiful to, one of his wishes, what he wanted. So when Andy turns 13, we'll probably, spread his ashes in Surfside, where we live. He loves Surfside, and maybe Key West. He also really loved, we have many special memories in Key West. So we'll probably do that in 4 years.
Beautiful. I've always said, because I'm obviously from the UK, so somewhere mid-Atlantic, you can just dump me. It's halfway between the UK and America. Maybe we'll take a cruise and people wonder why I'm someone's flinging the urn over the side. But
yeah.
All right. Well, then with the actual, events after, I want to get to the actual grief process in a moment, but with your perspective through the fire department, the way that we discovered each other was through the amazing compassion shown by Fernando's crew every Christmas, coming and bringing presents. And that's something I think that is beautiful. We're also very good at burying our own. But what I hear from a lot of widows is we're all there at the beginning. And then, it's not too long after that a lot of times they feel forgotten again. So without loading the question, what were the pros and the cons of, let's say, those first 6 months after he passed?
Yeah, so I think really my hat goes off to the city of Miami, fire rescue. They have been so amazing and really an example. I kind of see it as like all the fire departments do this, but I don't know if that's true. But just from my experience, they showed up and then continue to show up 6 years later. And that is something just so, so beautiful to see because, you said it, many people, and then just in general, everyone's there in the beginning. So in the beginning, you have all this, love and everyone's there, but then it's 2 years after, 3, 4 years after. And I think it's so special that, especially for our son, Andy, that they continue to be present in his life. And so when Fernando passed away, he passed away on October 1st of 2015. And of course, very hard time because you had like Thanksgiving, the holidays coming up, Christmas. And I remember that first Christmas, they called me and they're like, oh, what is Andy like? Is he into dinosaurs? Is he into trains? Like, what is he into? So I told them. And then that Christmas morning, they came with the fire trucks and a group of firefighters. I was staying at my mom's house at that time. And they showed up with like all these presents. And not only did they, gave him like this really cute train set, but they stayed building it. So they were at my mom's house, all these firefighters like building the train set. And I also want to even take it a step, back. But even while Fernando was sick, now that I'm, have in my mind the building, there was a playground in our backyard that Fernando started building, but he got sick and he couldn't finish it. I remember one afternoon, his firefighter friends came and they built his playground. And then they would donate vacation time to Fernando. So they when people talk about this like brotherhood, sisterhood, like I think there's like no brotherhood, sisterhood like the fire community, the police community. And it's so beautiful to witness. And so they would bring presents for Andy for Christmas. But not only that, when there was a hurricane, I remember they would call me and they were like, do you need help putting shutters or do you need help moving in your furniture, from the outside to the inside? And that was so helpful because at the time it was just me and Andy. So, just having them, checking in, I think that was something, so nice. I don't know. I think they kind of made that promise to Fernando, like, don't worry, we're going to look after, your son. You're going to be okay. And so we met, so we kind of connected, me and you, through social media. So I'll talk a little bit about that video. So I posted this video on Instagram. I did an Instagram reel because I just wanted to really show kind of a side that maybe other people don't see of the fire community. And because they would always do this in silence, they would do it not expecting, anything in return. So I'm like, people need to see how amazing this brotherhood is. So I took a video of Andy. He was, so they came over with their fire truck and then gave Andy his Christmas present, and actually brought the fire truck that my late husband used to drive. So Andy even so the video, you see Andy like going up like in the fire truck that his, we call him Papa, that his Papa used to drive. And it was just so beautiful to see Andy up there sitting in the same chair that his dad used to drive. And then also talking, like letting Andy know, like, your Papa used to drive this truck. And also, I think for me, it's very important to always keep Fernando's memory alive, not only for me, but for Andy, and know what his father did, and also hear stories from his coworkers, to talk to Andy about his dad. So that was very beautiful. That video went viral. It's crazy. But I just really wanted to show how amazing they are. And, and they always, I remember in July, they have this thing called like Christmas in July, where they do, an event too for the families of firefighters. And they've just always been, have gone above and beyond any of my like I really had no expectations, but they really have just been amazing through everything, and just been so present. And I remember when it was Andy's birthday, I have this video where all his shifts got together, Fernando shift, and sang Andy happy birthday. and just the little things like that, it's been very, very beautiful to watch.
Well, watching the video, you can see the joy on Andy's face, and obviously it's the time where they're wearing the mask, so he pulls down his mask and there's this big cheesy grin. I think it was at a hoverboard and video games, and you could just tell it was genuine joy. And I agree with you completely. The city of Miami has set a precedent, and it isn't the case in some departments. It's the case with some people in many departments, but not a culture. And I think that some areas we've lost that a little bit, and it's so powerful to hear this story, because I have had widows on that were like, yeah, everyone was here the first few weeks, and I haven't heard from people in, months and months or years and years. And that's on us. And, we are a overworked, sleep deprived community that is very hard to remember that kind of thing. So these are very powerful stories for us to hear, where, things are done right, where someone, loses a brother or sister firefighter and feels loved and feels part of that brotherhood or sisterhood, because, that's what we say, you're always going to be one of us. And sadly, sometimes that's lip service, but in this case, they're walking the walk, which is beautiful to hear.
I forgot to mention, because there's been so many little stories. I remember when Andy was starting first grade, his firefighter, I call them uncles and aunts, came to Andy's school with the fire truck. And they took all the kids, they got to go up on the ladder, and all the kids were like, oh my God, like Andy's so cool. So Andy definitely felt very, very cool and lucky. I mean, he has the best, uncles and aunties, and so grateful for that. So many stories, like, kindergarten, first grade, they'll just like show up at his school. And I think it's, there's so many other stories that I'm probably forgetting right now, but yeah, so many ways to show up.
Absolutely. 100%. And then, like you said, inside the fire service or just as a member of the community, I think these are such powerful lessons. Now, with the loss of Fernando, as you said, now you're, on your own again. You're a widow. You've got a young son. Walk me through that journey, and what were the elements that ended up being positive for you, and were there any negative things that you found trying to process the grief?
Yes, I think it's so hard. everyone's grief journey is so different, and there's no really timeline to grieve. And as you saw, like, it's been 6 years, but I don't know, maybe sometimes I'll be telling a story and it kind of like, it just brings all these emotions. But yeah, I'm at the point now where I can look back at these memories, and I look back at them with a smile, and look back at them, like how, like, grateful for these moments. But it is a lot of work. Like, I'm not gonna sugarcoat that it's easy, that you wake up the next day and like a year later and everything is better. Like, it does take a lot of personal work that you have to do. My journey. So I remember when Fernando first passed away, I think a few months after, I decided to go to a widow's support group. And when I got there, it was only me and another older lady. She was probably like in her 90s. And I remember just feeling worse. I was like, oh, well, at least she got like 70 years with her husband. I remember going back to my car and I started crying. And I just felt very like alone in this, journey. But, through social media, I was able to connect with other young widows, which that was very helpful to me. And then also just very, I would hear a lot of podcasts with other women that had the same story. And part of me was just trying to find, like, are they okay? Like, how are they doing? Just to really know that there is this light at the end of the tunnel. And of course, reading a lot of books on grief. And, I also did like a few therapy sessions, which that was very helpful as well to help me process all of this. But, having our son was just so helpful as well, because I couldn't stay in bed. I couldn't, it's kind of good and bad, but I always say you do need to give yourself time to grieve. Like, you can't just suppress the feelings and not go through it. Like, you really do need to go through it. There's no like around. And I remember thinking like, I just want to get to the other side already. Like, I just want this to be over. But I realized like you really do have to go through it and feel all the emotions. But my son was really my motivation too, to get up from bed and do stuff with him and take him to, ride bike. And, that was very, very helpful as well. But, also leaning a lot on my faith, and that I think was, of course, the number one thing that got me through. And I can see now, looking back, how many people resort to other things like alcohol or, things like that to really dull the pain, because it is so much to process. And I was very, fortunate that I had my faith, but sometimes I'm like, I don't know how do you do it any other way, But I think those things, seeing a therapist and, the podcast and, finding other young widows, having that community, I think was very, very helpful.
Now, when I heard you talking to the host on the Widow podcast, one thing that she'd asked you, I think, was about the shame or the guilt of not being able to be with your son, in the hospital, and then I'm sure after. And it kind of paralleled my wife when she was going through, after she lost her boyfriend. She kind of put herself in a bubble, and even though she got up and made sure her son was fed and got to school and all those things, now she looks back and still struggles with that shame of not being present, of having, grieving on her own and choosing some positive and some negative elements, and sometimes, him being on the outside a little bit. So was there any element of that with you?
Oh, definitely. And I always say, like, you do whatever you have to do to survive. Like, you do whatever you have to do to get through the day. I remember when Fernando was sick, I did feel, so bad that I couldn't be there for my son. But then I knew, I'm like, Fernando needs me right now. Like, he needs me. And if, God forbid something happens to him, then I'll always look back like, I wish I would have had that time. Part of me, would think if time is limited, I want to try to spend that time with him. And, once, going through that, once Fernando passed away, of course, you feel a little bit guilty if this, there's one day that maybe you just don't want to do anything. And maybe it's hard putting a happy face. But I think it also teaches your little ones that emotions are okay. Like, it's okay to cry. Like, I remember one time Andy saw me, sad. And it's like, mommy's sad. Like, it's okay. It's okay to be sad, because you don't want to, teach your children that you always have to be happy. Like, you can't be sad. And I think we live in this age where it's bad. Like, grief is so taboo. Like, we can't talk about grief, and you need to be happy again. Like, come on. Like, time is clicking. Like, you need to move on and you need to be happy quick. And everyone's journey is so different. And it's okay to be sad. And I remember I would get messages from people that would tell me, like, oh, I'm so happy that, you're happy again. I'm like, yeah, I'm happy, but, there's still always going to be a little part of me that's still, of course, I'm always going to miss Fernando. But in those beginning stages, if I was sad, that's okay. Like, you don't have to say, I'm happy to see you happy again, because that means that, so it's bad to feel sad, and it's totally normal. Like, we need to normalize, being, it's okay to be sad. Like, we don't always have to, be, positive or 100%, it's okay to really be in tune with your emotions. And I always say, for those that are going to grieve, just don't get stuck there. That's the most important thing. Like, you are allowed to grieve and be sad, but then just don't get stuck. And I would try to always keep that in mind. If one day I was feeling sad, I'm like, okay, I'm going to let myself feel all the feels, but then in a few minutes now I'm going to go and try to do something that makes me happy. And I think you learn very quickly that joy and grief can coexist. And there's things that no one really talks about these things until you actually go through this and you're kind of left trying to navigate this on your own.
When I met Becky, I think it was just over a year after she'd lost Danny, her boyfriend, and I was coming off a divorce myself, I think a couple of years prior to that. So, there's two people that have had trauma, they're coming together. And it's just interesting now looking back at navigating her, the element of, oh, is it too soon for her to be in a relationship? For me, the interesting lens was how you coexist with this new partner who also is mourning, and allowing space for the person that they lost to also be in that relationship, if that makes sense. So, talk to me about your journey into your marriage, and again, how you've made that new dynamic work.
Yes, I think for me, it was very important to learn that it was okay to be alone. It's okay to really learn to be by myself. And I think, having been married so young, I was always a partner. It was always me and Fernando. And we were each other's best friends. We didn't really have much friends. Like, it was always us two. Like, we were kind of glued to the hip. And so when he passed away, I kind of had to discover, who is Carmen? Like, what does Carmen like to do? And that was very, very challenging. And I always say, like, you can't expect like a new relationship to heal you. Like, you really need to put in the work and get to that good place of being complete on your own and not expecting someone else to complete you. So I think that for me was the most important thing to learn and to understand that, I kind of got to the point where it's like, if I remarry, that's fine. And if I'm alone, that's fine as well. But I did always keep thinking back to Fernando's words, where he would tell me, he's like, we weren't meant to be alone. We were meant to be in, to do life in community. But I think, a lot of people might want to get into a relationship thinking that it's going to, make everything better. But if you don't put in the work, you're quickly going to realize that it's all the opposite.
Well, I think that's wisdom even in any relationship. One of the things, one of the concepts is, the two becomes one, the you complete me kind of mentality. When you take a step back, the reason why you were attracted to someone is because they were an entire person. And then you and an entire person come together, and therefore you should navigate and elevate each other. I mean, my wife stood by me when I transitioned out the fire service to focus on this full time, which was terrifying financially for her. And now she's in med school and it's flipped. But we, this marriage, this very, very healthy marriage I'm in now, we lift each other up, but there's never any, you're a part of me or I'm part of you. No, we're a team, we're a married couple. And I think that's just it. I think you are 100% right. Whether it's grief or whether you've got no grief and you're just navigating relationships at the moment. If you're not at a place where you look in the mirror and you're content with who you are, you're always going to be disappointed if you're expecting someone else to fill that puzzle piece in.
Absolutely. I mean, you said it. A healthy relationship is made up of two healthy individuals. And that's the most important thing to really understand.
Now, as I touched on before, with your husband now, it's a very unique relationship being married to someone who lost someone. Because as you know, you've got to make space. And there was several years before Becky was even able to give Danny's clothes away from the closet, for example. How is your husband be able to navigate that? What are some tools for that dynamic? Because obviously we're not alone with that.
Yeah. And that's one of the biggest questions that I get. I mean, on my Instagram, I still post some things of my late husband. You said, last month we celebrated what would have been our 15th year anniversary. And I posted something about that. And I got questions, is your husband now, is he okay with you sharing, talking about your late husband? And I think as a widow going into another relationship, my number one thing that was so important to me was someone that was going to respect my past and someone that also understood that you never move on, you move forward. And for me, it was always very important to keep Fernando's memory alive. I mean, we share a son together. And I think anyone would want, I would never want, if I pass away, that my children forget about me or forget who I was or stop talking about me. And so for me, it was very important to have a partner that really understood that. And I am so grateful for Julio. That's the name of my husband. And I think it really takes a confident person to understand that, someone they're not jealous of your past. And that's one of the things that I love about him is that he fell in love with me, knowing that I am the person I am now because of Fernando. And it's because of Fernando and him, passing away that now we're able to be together. So he has so much respect for Fernando. And I immediately knew that Julio was the one where, what we had been dating, I think for a couple of months. And I thought, okay, I think we were dating for 6 months. And I was always very hesitant to introduce my son. I didn't date after Julio was the first person that I dated after Fernando passed away. And I remember always thinking I don't want to introduce my son to anyone quickly. So when I got to that point where it was time to introduce Julio to my son, and I introduced him as a friend, not as this is my boyfriend. Andy was, he was still, I think he was 4 at the time. And Julio bought him this little Firefighter puzzle. And I thought that was so sweet, trying to keep Fernando's, memory alive. And, I thought that was very, very beautiful. And till this day, like the post that I did of my 15th wedding anniversary, I actually run the caption by my husband. I'm like, what do you think of this? Like, do you like the way this sounds? And he's like, yeah, but maybe you should share this part, or maybe, So I think it's so important to be with someone that really honors your past and embraces it, because it made you who you are. Like Julio fell in love with me because of my experience and what I went through. And it does change you. And I don't think I was the same. I don't know if he would have been able to fall in love with the person, that I was, before. Like it made me a totally different person, the one that he fell in love with. And I think that for me is so important. And my son's room, our son's room, because Andy calls Julio dad. Like he knows that he has his papa in heaven and he has dad, which is Julio. And Andy came, I never told Andy, like, Andy, you need to call him dad. He kind of just wanted to call him dad. So I was like, okay, and they share this beautiful bond. And it's so, beautiful, because when I first became a widow, I was just very worried that Andy wouldn't have this like father figure. I dreaded like donuts with dad at school. Where I'm very grateful that we had my father-in-law step up and he would take Andy too. But, Andy would see the other kids with their dads. And, part of me, I wanted that for Andy to have a father figure in his life. And I'm so grateful that, Julio loves Andy. He says, that's my son. And every time he introduces, like he never says like, this is my stepson. He says, this is my son. And so Andy's room has a picture of him with his papa in heaven. There is like the flag that they gave me at the burial is also in his room. So we always keep Fernando's memory alive, and it's so important because of the son that we share.
Well, again, another beautiful story of another man being a real man. Not beating his chest and benching 350 and you're never crying, but a real human being that's compassionate and kind. And I think there's so many different dynamics in families where men and or women have stepped up, whether it's a widowed, partner, whether it's a someone who's married or all these different dynamics that occur. But ultimately, whether it's biological, whether it's, through some tragedy, if you are present in a child's life and raising them, then you are a beautiful, parent. And I think we need to celebrate all these different dynamics rather than holding this, what do they call it? Not organic. I'm forgetting the name anyway. The biological mum and dad that never divorced with the children, as that's the hierarchy, because that's not life in 2022. There's all these beautiful different dynamics, and anyone who's investing in raising their children is exactly what we need to move forward.
Yeah. And I definitely think it really takes a special person to raise another person's, biological son and really see that child as your own, and that's what Julio does, every day. It really pours into Andy's life and not only also with his actions and, just trying to be the best version of himself for Andy and for our daughter. We have a daughter now together, and, it's just this blended family and it comes different ways. A lot of people think blended families just as, whether divorced, but it's, could also be blended like our situation, that came about through tragedy. I think there's always beauty that could come about, even, the worst circumstances, even through tragedy.
Absolutely. I think nuclear family was the word I was struggling to remember, not organic. Organic's probably healthier though. All right. Well, I just want to transition to some closing questions if you got a moment just to answer some short ones for me.
Of course.
Brilliant. Well, you mentioned, some books that were helpful, whether it's, the grieving process or prior. So that's the first question. Are there any books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
Yes. I actually have my Audible listing because that's another thing. Sometimes you're so busy to really sit down and read a book. So I would get many of these books through Audible. But one of them that I remember, one of the first ones I read was called A Grief Observed, which was very beautiful. That's from C.S. Lewis. There was also the one that I told you about, the hospice. That one is called The Beauty of What Remains. And that one was very nice as well. So many. Another really beautiful book that really helped me a lot is called Through the Eyes of a Lion. And that one is not necessarily related to losing a spouse, but it's about, it's by Levi Lusko, and he lost his daughter when she was little. And it's called Through the Eyes of the Lion because when she passed away, they donated, I think it was the cornea of the eye. And it also talks about how you need to run towards the roar, run towards those painful things. Don't run away from it. The way to get through the grief is really running towards it. So his story is just so inspirational on how he, process, that loss and still going through it. So let me see. There was a really beautiful book. It's called When Breath Becomes Air. And this one was written by a neurosurgeon. And it was very beautiful for me to see. It's kind of through the eyes of the person that is dying. And I thought that book was so beautifully written. And one of the things that he wrote, which actually made me feel better that, Fernando didn't write a letter, because he wrote that, he thought about writing a letter to his daughter, but he's like, I don't know what I would say. I don't know the person she is going to become. So he didn't write a letter for his daughter. And so that kind of made me feel like, okay, it's okay that Fernando didn't write the letter, but that book is really, really beautiful.
Well, I've actually read that book. And so firstly, I agree with you 100%. It's funny, when I was getting ready to put mine on Amazon, I'm like, all right, well, let me, what categories do I put it under? And medical biography was one of them. And that was, I think, either number one or one of the top 5. And so I'm like, well, that sounds amazing. Let me get it. And what was really sad to me is as you go through his story, and obviously, he and his wife are both in the medical field, and you see the hours that he works in his residency, again, circling around the sleep deprivation. I'm like, now we're starting to learn more and more about it. The very thing that he was sacrificing for his study, where he was going to go and help people, I think was probably one of the things that ended up killing him. So it was tragic.
I thought the same exact thing. Whenever I hear, someone that, got cancer, immediately, I don't know, the mind in me always wants to go, okay, what could have contributed? And definitely, again, the long hours, very few sleep, the stress. I mean, he was a neurosurgeon. So, there's so much stress, and firefighters as well deal with so much stress from the job. So definitely the sleep, it's so important, and, doing things to relieve that stress and doing things to really just calm your mind, and, taking time out, even firefighters, we all need to take time out to really just ground ourselves and meditate. I know for some firefighters, it might be, I don't see them maybe doing yoga, but, definitely taking time for you. And like you said, hopefully something can change with the shifts.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny with the yoga. I've had Olivia Mead on, who has an organization called Yoga for First Responders, where she does put firefighters and cops through yoga, and it's amazing. I think yoga's incredible. But again, there's that stigma. You know, we're supposed to be shirtless on the calendar, covered in soot, not doing yoga. But actually, the second one is more beneficial than the first.
Of course.
All right. Well, then on that theme, what about a film or a documentary that you love?
Oh, yeah. So I love any documentaries that deal with health, because I think that helps us understand, ways to prevent cancer. And I think for me, it was very important to learn as much as I could about, health and nutrition. And I'm going back through some of my notes, but there's one called What the Health, which that one is really, really good. There is also another one that, let me see. Oh, The Game Changers. This one is on Netflix. And I think this documentary is, it's so good because it talks, when my husband was diagnosed, my late husband was diagnosed with cancer, one of the first thing the oncologist told him was to stop eating red meat. And so there's been more and more studies now that talk about how red meat is carcinogenic, hot dogs and, how bad it is for your health. So this documentary, The Game Changers, really talks about that because I think, you see all these like bodybuilders and you think that you have to eat meat, but actually one of the persons that they feature in the documentary, which is kind of like the strongest man alive, only eats vegetables. And they also give another example of how a rhinoceros, they only eat, vegetables as well. So I think it's very important to really look into nutrition and things that you can do to really help your body, God forbid if, anything that you can do to prevent cancer, or if you do get it, to really help your body be able to fight it before it gets to the stage where you're diagnosed when, it's a stage 4. But Food Inc. is also another one. It's a little bit older. I think that one came out in 2008. But yeah, those are a few good ones. I love anything. There's also, and I'll get this name for you, but I know Netflix also has a series which talks about all the daily toxins in your everyday life. Like there was one about, the pans that you cook with, like the Teflon, like removing Teflon. And this documentary talks about how the factory where they would produce the Teflon, the water that would drain out of the factory, the cows would drink that water, and their calves were being born with like 3 eyes and all this like craziness. And the women's that would work in those factories where they would produce the Teflon, their babies were being born with deformities. So I think, I love anything, and I really recommend anything that you can read or learn about, nutrition, especially as firefighters. I think it's so important.
Well, I agree with you completely. And it's interesting. I had James Wilkes on the show who made The Game Changers. And he had been, I've talked about this before, he'd been on the Joe Rogan podcast. And I think Joe is incredible and I listen to his show all the time. But the way the conversation went on his show is they ended up getting him on and he debated some other guy. I think it was Chris Kresser was his name, I think. And it was, whether you should be full vegan all the time or whether veganism is stupid. And what's so sad, and this is what I talked to James about on my interview, is the middle ground is more vegetables, less processed crap. That's, I think, so whether you have some, meat in your diet, because again, I think a lot of the science is mostly towards a processed meat. So again, really, really poor quality meat, nitrates and all these things thrown in as well. So say you lean towards a meat consumption, great. Well, if is it organic? Is it, is it the cleanest version of meat, ethics aside? But then, when you look at the plant-based side, again, is that clean, or are you getting chemical-covered, radiated vegetables? So
Yeah.
I agree with you wholeheartedly about the prevention element. When I look at the mental health issue, because I think equally with cancer, suicide is the number one killer now, and all these, it's a horrendous, rating scale that we have. Is it obesity? Is it cancer? Is it mental health? Well, it's all of these things, and that's what's heartbreaking. But yeah, I mean, if you watch Forks Over Knives and see the effective, the way that they were able to reverse some cancers with nutrition, I believe that. I've always said, hand on heart, if I get diagnosed with cancer, I'm going to go to one of these retreats and do the nutrition element, because I see chemo kill so many people. And that sounds, that's what a terrible thing to say. Well, when you look at the basis of the theory, you're basically scorched earthing the body and just hoping that it's going to kind of regrow, but when you look at the actual results, it's not, a highly effective way of treating it. And I think that if you can put homeostasis back in the body as much as possible, you've got equally as much of a chance of reversing, or if nothing else, if, as you said, either way, sadly, you're going to pass, at least your quality of life is probably going to be better than if you were blasted with chemicals. So everyone should have their own choice and decision, but the prevention element, I couldn't agree with you more. Any area that we can address toxins is an area that we can ultimately reduce the amount of people that get cancer.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, in my house, we only eat organic, and my husband now, he's like, that's so silly. Like, we don't, I've slowly changed his mind on that, because he used to think like it doesn't need to be organic, but, you could eat a strawberry, but if it's conventional, if it's not organic, you're getting all the pesticides that they put in, into the fruit. So it's not as healthy, as an organic strawberry. The same thing with like spinach. And there's also the dirty dozen. I know right now food prices are to the roof, but if at least you can start with the dirty dozen and get those organic. So there's a list of fruits and vegetables that you do want to make sure you get organic, because the skin is a lot thinner. So for example, strawberries, you want to make sure you get those organic. Blueberries. A banana, you could probably get it conventional, because, it's harder for the pesticide to get through, like a pineapple, avocado. But at least start, if you don't want to go all organic, at least start with the dirty dozen. And I also go by the 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time I try to eat very healthy. And then 20% of the time, I'll maybe make my husband, if he wants, to eat meat this day, we'll have tacos. I'm like, okay, but for the most part, 80% of the time we are trying to eat very healthy. And unfortunately, when you are diagnosed with a late stage cancer, that I feel like nutrition is going to be very hard to reverse once it gets to that stage 4. So what you want to make sure that, you are giving your body all the things before you even get diagnosed with cancer. And a lot of people think food, but it's also the products that you use on your body, the deodorant. I actually started a deodorant line, which it's kind of taken a back burner. I've been so bad because I've been so busy with like other projects, but, seeing what ingredients are in your deodorant, changing up your toothpaste, your skin is the largest organ, and everything you put on your skin is going to get absorbed. So what lotions you use, and also your household cleaning, the cleaning supplies that you use are so, like many of them they're so toxic, and it's so simple to make your own cleaning supplies. I started making my own a few years back, and just like water, vinegar is amazing. A little bit of alcohol. There's so many recipes if you go online to make your own. If you want like maybe something to clean your windows, or if you want something to clean the bathrooms, there's so many natural recipes without having to resort to all these toxic supplies. And then sadly, there's no regulations for beauty products. So they could put what, and I learned this myself when I started the deodorant line. I remember I called up, I think it was the FDA, and I told them, okay, so I want to start a deodorant line. What do I need? Like, do you need to see my ingredients? Do I need to send in a sample? They're like, no, I don't need to do anything. So I can literally put whatever I want into this deodorant, sell it to the public, and there's no regulations. And that's so scary. I mean, I think in Europe, I think they banned, I don't know, thousands of ingredients. And in the US, I think there's only a ban on like less than 30 ingredients. So it's just, I think we need to be more informed on that and take it more seriously. Because I think sometimes we think that it's not a really big deal, and it's just so important for our overall health.
Yeah, well, I've always questioned the whole skin cancer thing and how much that comes from lotions. I really do. Because, I mean, the fact that humans are all of a sudden unable to tolerate any sun just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. But also from the healthy side of the argument as well, once you recalibrate your taste, for example, the healthier food tastes amazing. And even I actually switched to Tom's deodorant, the stick. Very, very basic ingredients. It is the best damn deodorant I've ever used in my life. So it's so much better than the crappy ones.
I'm going to send you one of mine.
Oh, there we go. Until today.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's so important. I mean, Johnson & Johnson, there was a lawsuit for their baby powder. And they lost. And they had to pay billions and billions of dollars to people that got cancer from using their baby powder. And there's been studies that show that in the powder, they found asbestos. And there's still ingredients to this day, talc, that has asbestos in it. Most recently, there was a documentary that I saw on, I think it's Claire's. Claire's is one of those stores where they sell like things for girls, and they sell like earrings and makeup. And the mom bought a little eyeshadow palette for her daughter. And she started reading up on like talc, and she saw that it was one of the ingredients in that eyeshadow. And this was recently, not too long ago. And she sent it in to get tested. And in fact, they did find asbestos inside the eyeshadow palette. So it's, I think once we become more conscious of what we're putting on our bodies, now I think 1 in 3 people get cancer. And it's just so sad to see. And it makes you wonder, why are so many people getting cancer nowadays?
Well, and I think that's such an important point. And this last 2 years, and I've talked about this so much, there was no better time to look at all these preventative elements than now. The obesity epidemic, what we saw as far as healing in the environment when all the cars were suddenly off the roads. And yet that was again completely disregarded. And the fact that, people say, well, healthy food is expensive. If there's not a giant red flag, I don't know what is. Like, because all the subsidies are going to these giant, factories and these monocrop farms and, these horrendous things that are absolutely 100% causing so much death in this country and around the world, as you said, polluting our soils, our water supplies, and nothing, zero. In fact, you know what? You can just fling your masks and rubber gloves all over the ground. That's fine. So we as a population, especially if you're a firefighter where you're exposed to carcinogens that you can't control because you go into burning buildings, then, we have to take that back, go back to, 100 plus years ago where our great grandparents didn't have to worry about this stuff because there weren't, factories churning this. They weren't destroying our ground, and they weren't serving our children crap in schools, So I think this is such an important conversation for so many areas, even focus. I just finished reading a book on that and what those toxins do to our inability to focus now. So yeah, this is absolutely a conversation that needs to be had, and cancer should be at the forefront of it.
Yeah, I always say if you read the ingredients and you don't know how to pronounce it or you don't know what it is, then, look for something else. I think it's so important now. A lot of the food that's marketed for kids, has like yellow number, I don't know, 5, red number, like what ingredient is that? Like you really need to read up on your ingredients. I mean, cancer, basically what it is, it's just your body there's inflammation. And it's your immune system is not able to catch those cells that are multiplying. So things that cause inflammation, anything that you can do to reduce it, milk, cow milk, and there's been studies that it causes inflammation, as well as the red meat and things like that. So if you could get your body back to a place where you reduce the inflammation, I think that's a good start.
Absolutely. Well, that was a hell of a tangent on my books and movies question.
Yes. I'm very passionate, as you can see, about organic. And I always tell people, because they think, they're like, it's so expensive, but then maybe like organic food is a little bit more expensive, but then sickness is just as expensive. When you get sick and you're not able to work and you have all these medical bills, that's very expensive.
Absolutely. I had a guy, Joel Salatin. So if you think about Food Inc., there was a chicken farmer. He's got, wire glasses and dungarees on, a big straw hat. Amazing guy. And, one of his quotes is, "You think organic food is expensive? Have you priced cancer lately?" I mean, that's exactly it, and it shouldn't, organic food should be cheap because we should have local farms. These chemicals should be banned and we should be subsidizing these farms and subsidizing them cooking real food in our children's schools and getting soda machines out of them, but sadly right now they line the pockets of people that make laws. And these giant companies get all the subsidies, and our local men and women that actually could feed our towns and cities don't get any of it. So it's so backwards.
Yeah. And I think, from watching these documentaries, you learn so much too. And if you look at the American food pyramid, you see so different than if you say you go to Europe and you see their food pyramid where they have fish and they have nuts and grains. And here in the US, you have, meat. And part of that is when you look at the lobbyists that are in charge of, and they put in their money to get, certain foods in the food pyramid, you learn so much and you kind of see, oh, I see why now. this is there.
Absolutely.
But, yeah.
Beautiful. Well, all right. Well, then the last question before I make sure everyone knows where to find you if they want to reach out. What do you do to decompress these days?
What do I do? So I love to go paddleboarding. I haven't been paddleboarding in a little bit, but I have my paddleboard ready to go for the summer. And a lot of my audiobooks. So I don't have much time to sit down and read a book with 2 little ones, but I really decompress at the end of the night with my audiobooks. I actually will go to sleep just listening to a good book. And then just spending time with my family, going to the beach. I think the beach is my happy place, and I love just spending time in the water and just being around my loved ones. Beautiful.
Well, again, it's been such a great conversation. I'm sure there's a lot of people that would love to reach out, learn more about your products and other areas that you blog about. So where are the best places online to find you?
Yeah, so the best place where I'm the most active is on Instagram. So it's at Carmen Ordoñez, and the Ordonez, I'll spell it out because a lot of people might not know how to. So it's ORD as in David, ONEZ as in zebra, and then TV. So Carmen Ordoñez TV. So that's where I share I have travel tips. I love to travel with my family and a bunch of other good stuff.
Brilliant. Well, Carmen, I want to say thank you. As I say with a lot of people that come and really kind of bore their soul, if that's the right word, bared their soul, there's 2 sides to that. I mean, obviously people listening are going to resonate deeply. There's going to be a lot of lessons they can pull away. But at the same time, I understand that taking you back to some of those memories, is at a cost as well. So I truly appreciate you being so vulnerable and courageous in telling yours and Fernando's story today, and Andy's.
Oh, thank you so much, James. And thank you so much for everything that you're doing with this podcast. I think, it's so going to be so helpful it's already been so helpful to so many of our firefighters and police officers. So thank you so much for everything that you do. And thank you for thinking of me. I'm so honored.